there is a market among slaveholders for young enslaved women who are essentially being trafficked for sex. And in the slave trade, the euphemism for that was referring to them as fancy girls. They're often young, they're often light-skinned, and these are people who were imagined that white men would see them as being very beautiful and would want them basically for purposes of rape. And it's not something that that is necessarily something that slave traders specialized in, but they certainly would sort of size up basically every young woman who came into their custody and imagine to themselves, okay, can I market this person as a fancy girl? Part of the reason that slave traders are looking for young women who they might sell as fancy girls is that they could charge a premium for that. And so you can see in the prices for which young women are being sold, you know, in any given market in any given year, there's going to be a price for, say, young women who are maybe 15 to 20 years old, and that price is going to be pretty consistent. But you also see periodically that there are girls and young women of those ages who are being sold for hundreds of dollars more than that. And unless they have some particular skill, a cook or a laundress or something like that that is going to be especially valuable in the market, there's only one reason why that price increase is going to be there, and that's because they're being marketed as fancy girls. So obviously one consequence of the fact that slaveholders are raping women who they enslave is that sometimes those women have children. Now, often the goal of having enslaved women was that they would have children. It does change the dynamic somewhat, though, when they are having children of the person who enslaves them. And that can go in a lot of different directions. There are slaveholders who treat children who they have by enslaved women almost as if they are free white children. We do see situations like that where they are educated and brought up living in the house with their father, who's also their enslaver, who might then free them in his will, might leave some inheritance to them. So that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is complete indifference. The other end of the spectrum is that slaveholders treat their own children as enslaved people because they are enslaved people. They could put them to work in the fields, they could buy and sell them, and there's nothing controlling what a slaveholder chooses to do. Whether or not an enslaved woman gives birth to someone with a genetic connection to a slaveholder, the person who they give birth to is nonetheless that slaveholder's property, and by and large he's able to do with that property whatever he wishes. That's how slavery worked. It makes enslaved people sort of slaveholders have almost entire control over the fiefdom that they oversee and the people who they keep in bondage.
The children that were the product of sexual violence or assault between white slaveholders and enslaved women always forced the slaveholder himself to ask, what next? In some cases, they ignored that child. They denied it existed. Other cases you see, rarely, but sometimes you see efforts to move that child and the mother toward a greater piece of life that was easier, maybe even emancipation. But in the end, that child had no promise of a better life. It was still enslaved. I don't want to allow the progeny of that assault in any way to take us away from the assault. But that's the basis of that particular relationship. It doesn't contradict efforts, of love for the mother for the child, or even for the father for the child. We never want to get away from its context, which was during slavery, when consent was impossible, when violence was the norm.
If you think about slavery and the power dynamic that exists during slavery. As an enslaved woman, I have absolutely no say-so about my body. I am the property of some white man, okay? And so as the property of some white man who is not recognized by the law at all, who has absolutely no legal authority at all, even as a woman now. So really, as an enslaved woman, no legal authority, no legal standing. I don't have the, to say that I could tell my slave owner that I didn't want to sleep with him, that I didn't want to have sex with him. Enslaved women didn't have that choice, right? There's no choice about the matter at all. You are owned by this person. As an enslaved person, you have to abide by what they want, and their wishes were paramount. And so the idea that Sally Hemings consented, that was a consensual relationship with a person who had no legal standing to consent to anything, who couldn't even, her children weren't even hers. They belonged to him. So that is ludicrous. The thought is ludicrous that any woman, enslaved woman, would even have the right to say no.
Relationships between slaveholders and enslaved women, there's no consent. The power dynamic is too legal, it's too grotesque to prohibit any kind of consent between the slaveholder and the enslaved person. That said, could romantic feelings exist across the color line? Probably. But the issue of consent or any kind of equality in relationship is a fiction, I think, that we tell ourselves to great ill effect, because it pulls us away from the brutality of slavery and hides, I think, the tremendous power and patriarchal authority that white slavers always had. Was there a romantic relationship between an enslaved person and a white slaveholder? One that was based on a mutuality of respect and love and admiration was impossible. Slavery was always there. Consent was never possible.